Can a driver with 7 world titles lose a podium because of a poorly adjusted screw in his front wing? Or is there something much deeper and worrying behind Hamilton's performance at the 2025 US GP? Lewis Hamilton arrived at the United States Grand Prix with a mixture of pressure and excitement. The circuit of the Americas COTA in Austin has always been one of its most favorable terrains. Since his debut, he has won multiple victories at this track, and it was hoped that there he could finally break his long drought of podium finishes since his arrival at Ferrari. At first glance, 4th place may seem respectable, but beneath the surface, this race exposed the true structural fragility of a team that, despite promises of renewal, continues to make strategic errors, fail in technical evolution, and provide its drivers with a car incapable of competing on equal terms against its direct rivals. Ferrari showed up at Austin without any major updates, unlike Red Bull and Mercedes, which implemented key improvements to aerodynamics and cooling. This lack of development revealed the inertia with which the Scuderia works at critical moments in the championship. The technical environment of the Grand Prix was demanding. High track temperatures, variable wind conditions, and asphalt that requires precision in both tire management and traction when exiting slow corners. This last factor would be one of those that most punish the SF25, whose architecture seems designed for ideal conditions, but which easily collapses in the face of any alteration in the environment. The car's operating window remains extremely narrow, and that in modern Formula One is synonymous with inconsistency. Hamilton, for his part, was fast in practice and had a solid qualifying, reaching 5th place on the grid. In the early stages of the race, his experience was decisive. He made a clean and precise start, quickly placing himself in the podium area, ahead of his former teammate George Russell. However, that brief moment of glory was short-lived. What seemed like a historic opportunity to obtain his first podium dressed in red ended up becoming another painful lesson in the limits of the material that Ferrari puts at its disposal. The most revealing thing about the weekend was how the performance of Hamilton's car degraded as the laps went by. The SF25 began to lose efficiency from lap 10, and from lap 15 it became practically unmanageable in certain sectors. This downward trend in performance once again put an uncomfortable reality on the table for Ferrari. Its car is not capable of maintaining the pace in long runs, it does not manage tire wear well, and requires conservative strategies that sacrifice competitiveness. It is a car that demands too much from the driver without offering real tools to fight for privileged positions. The irony of all this is that Austin was, in theory, a circuit that should benefit the characteristics of the Ferrari: medium speed corners, long straights with DRS zones, and strong braking. But that theoretical advantage never materialized, mainly because the car lacks the flexibility to adapt to the dynamic changes of the race. And that, in the hands of a driver like Hamilton, is not only frustrating, it is humiliating. Understeer, for those unfamiliar, is the tendency of a car to go straight when the driver attempts to turn. In a Formula One car, this phenomenon can arise from multiple causes: unbalanced weight distribution, poor management of the front aerodynamic load, overheating of the front tires, or even a poorly calibrated aerodynamic center of pressure. In the case of SF25, all of this appears to be happening simultaneously. Between laps 10 and 30, Hamilton began insistently reporting on the radio that the car had massive understeer. This statement is not exaggerated. According to the telemetry, the Briton had to apply significantly greater turning angles in key corners such as turns 9, 11, and 19, something that not only compromises the line, but progressively destroys the front tires. In these technical and low-speed sectors were intensified lap after lap, compromising traction at corner exit and causing constant time losses compared to direct rivals such as George Russell and Oscar Piastri. In an attempt to understand what was happening, Hamilton even requested information about the setup from his teammate Charles Leclerc. This request is a rarity for drivers of his caliber and demonstrates the extent to which he felt limited by the car. Hamilton, with his vast experience, knows how to adapt to adverse circumstances, but the level of unbalance at the front of the car was beyond even him. Another critical factor was added to this technical drama: brake management. The Maranello team was forced to implement a lift and coast strategy, a technique that consists of lifting the foot off the accelerator before the braking point and letting the car roll, with the aim of reducing the thermal stress on the brakes. But this tactic, which can be useful in extreme conditions, seriously compromises a driver's ability to brake late and attack in overtaking zones. On a circuit like Austin, where opportunities to gain positions are directly related to aggressive braking, this conservative adjustment was a sentence of mediocrity. The consequence of all these factors was clear. Hamilton began to lose time against drivers with more balanced cars and better operating windows. Although he tried to keep the McLarens at bay and resist the advances of the middle pack, each lap was a fight to keep the car within the limits. The SF25 not only forced him to fight against his rivals, but also against the car itself, which is an unacceptable scenario for any driver who aspires to the podium. The fact that Hamilton had to fight understeer not once, but for almost half a race, reveals a profound inability of the Ferrari team to correct structural problems that have already been repeated on other circuits. It is not a bad day, nor a specific setup error. It is a systemic flaw that is ingrained in the car's design and is sabotaging the full potential of its driver lineup. The SF25 appears to have an architecture designed to operate within a very limited range of conditions. When you are at that exact point of temperature, tire pressure, and downforce, you can be competitive. But outside of that ideal zone, it becomes a capricious machine that is difficult to control. And that's what Hamilton experienced in Austin. A car out of control, with erratic behavior and steering that simply did not respond. If the car can't turn when the driver needs it to, it doesn't matter how much talent there is behind the wheel. In Formula One, if you don't have the right tools, you are doomed to fight from behind. And that's exactly what happened to Lewis Hamilton in the heart of Texas. Qualifying for the United States Grand Prix was not only the first indication that something was wrong with Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari SF25, that during Q1, Hamilton was already reporting a severe lack of grip on the front axle. The reaction was immediate, but also revealing. He began to progressively increase the levels of front downforce, adjusting the front wing at each pit stop. In total, he added what he himself described as 8 spoiler holes, an extremely aggressive and unusual intervention. In engineering terms, this represents a substantial change in aerodynamic balance and is usually a measure of last resort when the car behaves uncontrollably. These changes are more than just mechanical adjustments. At that level of competition, making so many modifications to the front wing means that the initial setup of the car was completely outside the optimal window. That is to say, Ferrari took a car to the track that was not even remotely close to being competitive from the first attempt. The most serious thing is not that they made a mistake in the initial setup, but that the team needed the entire qualifying session to discover it, and that when they finally found some balance, it was already too late. The direct consequence was that Hamilton barely achieved his best lap in the last Q3 attempt when he no longer had room to fine-tune details, test the car's reactions, or generate confidence. The additional downforce that he had requested was only half effective. It allowed the time to be improved on a specific lap, but did not solve the underlying problems. The car continued to be inconsistent in slow corners and demanded too much energy from the front tires, which accentuated overheating and limited any possibility of preparing the car for long racing runs. This reactive approach to qualifying left Hamilton caught in a technical dilemma. On the one hand, he achieved a P5 on the grid, which, under normal conditions, would have been a good starting point. On the other hand, that position was reached with a configuration that completely compromised the balance of the car for Sunday. The priority was to find grip on a fast lap, not to prepare a stable and efficient setup for the demands of the race. The result, a car that looked decent on Saturday, but that fell apart from the first laps on Sunday. But the most worrying thing about this situation is what it reveals about the car itself. When a driver needs to increase the load on the front axle so much just to keep the car on the track, we are dealing with a structural failure, not a simple lack of grip. It means that the car suffers from an unbalanced mass distribution, aerodynamic inefficiency, or a suspension geometry that does not allow the tires to generate the necessary grip. And if that happens on a circuit like COTA, where high, medium, and low speed curves are combined, the projection for the rest of the calendar is frankly discouraging. With this result, Hamilton has now accumulated 19 Grand Prix without being on the podium. A figure that in any other driver could go through an unfortunate streak, but in his case, it is a symbol of the technical decline of a team that has not managed to live up to its legend. The "he just needs time to adjust" narrative is starting to wear thin. It's no longer about piloting adjustments or getting used to a new work culture. Do you really think that Ferrari can give Hamilton a car with which to fight for victories this year? Or are we seeing a repeat of the cycle that Sebastian Vettel experienced during his time at Maranello, where individual talent was never enough to overcome the team's technical inertia? Leave your analysis in the comments.